So welcome everyone. My name is Fredrik Amén. I work as a sales director in Canary Group that is a part of Conscia. Today's agenda is about observability as a topic and how it can be used to minimize risk, reduce costs, and increase productivity. And I will just lead you through the agenda, a little bit of background of Conscia, and then I will ask Kent and Michael to introduce themselves. It's not possible to speak with us in this webinar, but it's definitely possible to write down your questions in the chats. Please do. And I will summarize them at the end. I have approximately 10 minutes at the end to go through if you have any questions regarding the data or the things we are discussing here. So for the agenda, it's about the IT operations and the new era of it and how we can use observability to minimize risk and cost saving strategy and also drive productivity from observability and actually find maybe new business areas that you can use. We'll talk a little bit about the approach of observability because I think a lot of companies have attempted it but failed because maybe they didn't have the right strategy for it, and also give you some insights and call to actions hopefully at the end. So Conscia at a glance is a profitable company with a pretty high customer satisfaction and employee satisfaction score. We serve over 1,000 customers across Europe. We have different geolocations and a lot of different offices. We have about 1,300 employees, give and take, up and down. So also give you an insight in what we do at Conscia. So we design, implement, and manage IT security and infrastructure, and also give you observability. So most of our customers have or are naturally target for cyber attacks. And to help our customers secure the infrastructure and data, we also offer a 24/7 SOC, for example. We do manage network and data center infrastructure, and usually for large customers with critical infrastructure. We also deliver customers' demand to security, resilience, and quality. We give them data insights. And we do that with Power BI, CM, and definitely observability, which is the topic of today. So I will pause the presentation here, and I will ask Michael and Kent to introduce yourself. Maybe you want to start, Kent.
So my name is Kent Hade. I work at Conscia Norway as part of the sales organization responsible for technical sales and marketing. I work a lot with marketing, things like this, and I have a broad scope of expertise and experience from cybersecurity, infrastructure, hybrid cloud, and those things. I've worked for Splunk, a little bit for Cisco, etc. So I basically come from the networking and cybersecurity part of all this, and for me, observability is exciting in the way that us as a company trying to like secure the hybrid workplace. My thought is that you cannot secure what you cannot see. And that's where, for me, observability becomes an integral part of what we're trying to do going forward.
Awesome, thank you. Michael?
Yeah, so Michael Breen, then also based in Oslo, but I'm leading then Canary, which is then, well, it's not too long ago, but of course we became a part of the Conscia family late last year. Well, I am a little bit of well, not the opposite, but of course, slightly different background into this observability space than Kent mentioned. Been with Canary now since we started up back in 2011. So time flies by, 14 years ago, where we actually have exclusively focused on the observability space. But what is interesting to see, I think we will touch a little bit on that today, is observability or monitoring and all these things. Which angle do you come from? You know, do you actually approach it from? And many that sit with infrastructure has this perception that you always attack it from the application and service side. If you talk, well, the traditional observability guys been talking from that way, but actually there's just as many approaches that comes from the infrastructure, you know, and into the applications as well. So no, but looking forward to today. I hope we will have some interesting discussions.
Yeah, we better. So thank you. So, I mean, Canary and Conscia spent years solving observability challenges across perhaps some of the most demanding IT ecosystems in the market. And today's session, I would like to challenge you guys a little bit and hope that you can share some of the best practices about the truth about observability and how actually to make it work in a real world. Because there's a lot of, if you Google observability, you get flooded with information. So maybe we could start off with like the common question then. So observability, you mentioned monitoring earlier, Kent. Observability, isn't that just monitoring?
I could say yes, right? Because you have to monitor stuff because that's how you get data. So maybe like the biggest thing for me is that when I started out like 15, 20 years ago, we used to monitor stuff, but it was just, is it up or is it down? Is there an error here? Is something faulty? But it doesn't really tell you what's going on, right? It just tells you that something is wrong. And then you need to gather lots of people in the war room. It's finger pointing, it's silos, and you have to manually like investigate. And maybe you managed to figure out what's wrong. And if you didn't, you just booted the stuff, right? Then everything worked. So for me, maybe the biggest thing when you like add observability to something is that you go from something is wrong to being presented with and trying to figure out why it is wrong, right? Why is there something not working? Because that's what we're trying to figure out. So it's sort of like finding the needle in the haystack quicker and reducing the mean time to resolution, right? Because 14 days, who can wait, right? You want to do it 7 minutes. So that's a big thing for me.
Cool, thank you. And Michael, do you have anything to add on that as well?
Yeah, I think, of course, being in the place where we have been very focused on this area, I do think, well, even monitoring in itself had changed a lot, but then also observability has changed. So the definition is somewhat hard, but I think we've come a little bit further now. There is a certain traction, of course, in the whole in the whole, say, business, that observability started to get more standardized. I think a big thing would be, rather than looking at systems, you're looking inside the systems. So you're not just looking at something is wrong, as you said, Kent, but why is it wrong? But also, why does that is wrong actually fail? And does it fail in itself? Does it fail because of what's around it? Does it fail because of is it a development? Is it something else? But I think a big thing that happened was when I think there's two definitions now. You have something called 3 pillars of observability, and then you have in the SRE community the 4 golden signals. You can actually add one more. But the standardization has come quite far. We also see things now like open telemetry changing the way that I think we will start to how we will see and perceive what observability is actually about. But in the end, it's quite simple, right? In the beginning, you just need data. You need the typical things. You need metrics. You need logs. You need traces. And the fourth that golden brings, which is the events. But I think a lot what we will see now is, since it's being more and more standardized, observability is not just going to be about getting data. The big differences are going to be, how can you utilize the data? How can you contextualize it? How can you put on, relevant, good technology and AI to figure it out? Because that's another thing. With this massive amounts of data, I think a big challenge going forward is going to be, making sense of it. And that's just not about tools. So I think it's exciting what's happening.
That's a very nice segue. I think tools, you mentioned that, because I think a lot of people and companies just categorize observability as a tool, especially if you Google the term. There will be many different tools around observability and platforms out there. Is that correct, by the way, Kat? Do you have anything?
Yes, I have. I think I've so one product once that was actually had observability in its name, and No, the answer is probably no. So you can have one tool, or you can have 10 tools, or you can have 50 tools. It's not going to give you what observability is. It's going to give you, as Michael said, it's going to give you data. It's going to give you data sets, and it's going to give you maybe some form of feedback in terms of alerting and monitoring and all that stuff, but that's not what we're trying to do. So observability is maybe more like a way of working, right? It's the way we work with these tools. It's the way we handle the data across all of these different tools, or at least trying to minimize the amount of tools to reduce the noise you have as well, like alert fatigue and all that stuff that's just bogging us down. So yeah, I think that success maybe also lies in trying to implement observability in the way we handle IT operation. Like it's a natural part of operating the IT infrastructure, instead of something you just turn to when something is not working. Right? It has to be, it's like an integral part of the way we work. So that's
Exactly.
I think that's a good approach.
Cool. Want to add something to that, Michael?
Yeah, I think we need to stop installing tools and actually implement them. And I think those two, this is a very big distinction. Because when I say, I could say something, maybe smallly controversial, but I think the actual tools or tool that you have is becoming less and less important. Because what we see in the market, and with many of our customers and also the prospects that we talk to, is that the tools and what they have is more than capable of what they want to achieve and where they are. The problem is actually not the capabilities and functions; it's how they use it. How is it embedded in the teams? What about the processes and all of that, right? So I think more and more what we have seen is the importance of them having a strategy, having a plan for what do you want to achieve? What do you want to achieve first? Who's going to run it? Who's going to use it? What am I going to change on the basis of what I get? And well, I think the focus more and more going back then from tools into what are you trying to achieve, and it sounds so simple, it sounds so almost stupidly simple. Then focus on, okay, we actually want to achieve this and A and B, instead of then installing something and thinking that that's going to solve anything, because what you get is more data, not the usage of the data. So advisory side of what we've been doing the last few years has become more and more important. That is, of course, to go in and cooperate with the customer to say, how are you going to use it? The first half year, what are you going to achieve? I think more and more that's where the emphasis is going to be.
So like we map up the current state and the desired state and build a strategy how to actually get to the desired states, but also challenge them maybe along the way. Right?
Yeah, but it's basically it's very back to basic, isn't it? It's like any other area. Know where you want to go and how to get there.
Cool. Thank you, guys. So if we move to the next topic, which was how to use observability to minimize risk. And maybe I hope you have some use cases that you can pull out of your head. Because I know if you start Googling and if you speak with these different observability vendors, they all claim that you can use observability to minimize risk. And so what's your thoughts around that, Kent?
Well, there are obvious things, right, with stability and resilience and basically making sure you're operative, right? So that's basically what we want. And there's the cybersecurity side, right? Am I being breached? What are the potential risks of being breached? How can I minimize that risk of being breached? And the way we do that is gathering all this data to get a holistic view of your infrastructure, right? So that's the two main ones. Maybe it's stability and the risk of breach and integrity of your data. But then there's a lot of other things, right? If you don't have, let's take an example. If we go 20 years back and you look at the basic application, it used to be like a monolithic application, right? Everything ran on one server in one exe file or one Java, right? It's pretty easy to know what's going on because everything is inside of that one thing. But now the architectures are distributed. They might be in one cloud, two clouds. It might be on-prem. It might be Kubernetes. It might be a distributed database. You know where I'm going, right? So being able to have the insights in all of these different areas, all at once, and correlating that data to give you to be able to pinpoint where something is wrong reduces that time to find the actual fault, and that's a big risk reducer for me. And I think for companies that are delivering products or services that are time critical, I think that's really important. And you also have examples of like being able to spot something being wrong before it actually happens, like predicting. And to be able to predict, you need to have a lot of data. And I remember like 15 years ago when I started working with Splunk, we did something like really easy where we gathered data from Exchange. And based on gathering all this data from all of these different mailboxes and stuff, we were able to predict when we had to expand storage, right? So we could expand storage before we ran out of storage and it was critical, we had to order. So easy use cases like that. And now you can do it on a broader set of infrastructure, right? Because you gather data from everywhere. So those types of things to be able to plan and scale ahead also reduces operational risk.
Awesome.
I think that there are a few other areas that we see that you don't necessarily think about when you think about risk and how it can aid. And I think one of the few, I can take one of the customers we have where there's a huge observability practice that this customer has developed. And one of them is what I like to call, well, sometimes you call it competence, or I would say architectural risk that you have with regards to even understanding the complexity that you just explained earlier here, Ken, where, okay, you have one guy and he knows most of this part. He's like the oracle for that. And if he, for some reason, is not there anymore, then, you're really struggling because who else can tell how this big, fantastic 3,000 piece machine is working. And we have meetings actually once a quarter with the architectural board to actually go through developments that has happened, not just on capacity, but anything from where there is an increase in errors, where we've added lots of new functionality, where you start to see capacity issues, also with regards to what should we, for instance, invest in next year when it comes to budgeting. Are we going to reduce some technical debt over here? Are we going to add something over here? Are we going to switch out something here? And that's a very different sort of risk and use case that people don't usually think about. And then the last thing I will mention, because that I think most people, when you think about risk, you very automatically think about the compliance of it. And of course, the ever-rising compliance, demand that is hanging over us. We still see actually now, last year was some of the first, well, even the year before, that we started to see some project being initiated purely out of compliance demands. And that's new for us. It's just, it's becoming quite overwhelming also to be able to just automate reporting, just that you need, for the compliance part.
Exactly. You think about DORA, those types, for example, I guess.
Well, within the finance, it's been particularly bad, right? You have PSD2 was before that, the payment service directives reporting to the authorities. Yes, you have DORA now with the Operation Resilience Act. There's many different, and there will be more, especially also now around sustainability, that also starting to become a part of observability requirements.
Cool. Kent, are there any other challenges maybe around the risk you would like to emphasize?
Yeah, there's one thing that we don't really talk that much about, right? I think you can go to any company, and when there's an issue, there's always like the one guru, right? That guru in the organization that basically knows everything, and every time there's something wrong and something needs fixing, you need to call that guy. And if you like read the book, The Phoenix Project, they have that one guy. Every time something breaks, they have to call in this one guy. And if he's not there, it just boggles up, right? And that book is about ITIL or change management, but it could well as be just been about observability. Because if they had had observability in that book, they wouldn't have needed to be so reliant on that one guy. So I think that's sort of an unspoken thing in the entire industry, maybe, that we tend to become very dependent on certain types of competencies and individuals and knowledge. And yeah, it's that's also a huge risk that we don't really talk about until they leave, right? And there's also things like when you install lots of monitoring tools, you turn them on, like you install them, like Michael said, you don't implement them, they start spamming you with stuff, and you get lots of alerts, lots of noise, you get alert fatigue, and then you just stop looking, and then you forget about it because it basically gives you too much noise. And then you forget about the tool and you stop developing the tool, and you won't notice the actual things that are wrong because you get bogged down with unnecessary data. So that's more like an operational, maybe financial risk, because you buy and you invest in things that you don't implement correctly, and that's just a waste of money, right?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. That's usually that people who invest a lot in monitoring get overwhelmed with irrelevant data and alert fatigue.
Yeah,
usually by email or SMS text messages.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. So if we move to the next point, where we maybe can discuss a little bit how we can use observability as a cost-saving strategy. So I think typically many customers tell me that observability tools are expensive, which they can be, obviously.
Yeah.
So when I said, well, it can be used as a cost-saving strategy, I wouldn't say I get laughed at, but eyebrows are usually raised, and I maybe get questioned on what do you mean by that. So what are some practical examples of cost savings that can be achieved with an observability strategy? Can you start, Kent, maybe?
Yeah, there's. I understand why they raise their eyebrows, because you can't just buy, implement, and then check it off in your spreadsheet that you saved something, right? That's not how it works. You need to actually invest time and energy into optimizing so that you save somewhere else. And that's one of the things that I've noticed is it's a little bit hard with these kinds of tools and technologies, is that because it's not always the ones that procure them that save something. And then you get into a little bit of a conflict if you're not good at cross communication and removing silos and having a good plan. But for actually being able to reduce cost, you can do easy things like looking at workloads, for example. How am I actually using my infrastructure? How is it performing? Can I reduce the amount of VMs or containers or DBs? How are they performing in relation to each other? When do I have load? When do I not have load? Can I auto scale, example, by integrating with other infrastructure tools? So that's basically on like the operational side. And then you have, do you have 10 tools? Can you reduce to 5 by optimizing the way you use them? Can you reduce to 3 if you implement them correctly and efficiently? So it's everything from saving on licenses and usage to actually saving on workloads and operational management. So and of course preventing incidents and reducing downtime, all the basic stuff, right? So yeah.
All the jazz.
Yeah, all the jazz.
Yeah, I concur with that point, where in the enterprises we do see someone is buying it, and then the benefits are more spread out to other parts which are not bearing the cost necessarily.
Yeah.
And that's of course a big challenge, because as in any place, who's going to pay? And then why am I paying for this when you get the benefit and so on? And that's a typical thing. But I think you mentioned the auto scaling, all of that. What we do see now, of course, more and more infrastructure as a code. Use of other tools. You have Terraform, you have Ansible, you have SaltStack, you have other very many automation platforms that are taking really into use. And I think a big thing before you start to talk about cost savings, well, you mentioned it. You need to know how much you can scale up and down, so you can tell the automation platform. So you need to link that up. That's a very important thing before you can actually even start to do it. And at the same time, you need to keep it compliant, because that's the thing we very often see is missed. We just automate it. Yeah, but what about, how do you track it? How do you document it? How do you do all of that? That's an important factor. But and you can't prevent incident or auto scale without the linked automation. So if you're going to have, and that's also when you can save and use your resources elsewhere. I think that's one big thing. And then again, I think the tools in themselves, you can't fix. And we're going to come back to that, I think, when we talk about a little bit of productivity later, as far as I understand. And you mentioned one thing which I actually disagree on, or not disagree, but we will have a minor discussion around that, Kent. And you said remove silos. And I don't necessarily believe in removing silos. We've been talking about that for years. I think more about linking them or connecting the silos. And that depends on, I guess, the way you look at it. But we can get into that on the productivity side. But for me, the cultural differences between the different, I would say, environments and competence centers that you have within technology, you will always have sort of knowledge silos within certain technologies. But I think the way we speak about it now is how to connect them and link them. So you see the bigger picture, not that you remove something that, is probably something with deep knowledge regarding a certain area.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think it's also maybe a little bit about semantics, right? When I say remove silos, I basically mean we need to start talking to each other. So, right, we've all been in organizations where something is wrong, and the first thing someone says, it's not my fault, right? It's probably your fault. And that guy says, no, it's not my fault. It's probably those guys, right? So that's what we need to get rid of, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, there's some certainties in life, and that it's always network's fault. Everyone knows that.
It's always the firewall.
So if you talk, you mentioned productivity. It seems quite obvious that I think when an engineer spends less time maybe chasing issues and spend more time on productive stuff like coding new stuff, it is more productive. So what kind of role can observability have in this?
Well, I think we can just continue on what we just talked about. I think it's about linking the silos. What we still see is there is a sort of siloed approach still, even with, you mentioned the Phoenix project, and then we got sort of, DevOps on this full way in. Now you have, of course, SRE starting to dominate a lot. And yes, there's been leaps of maturity with regards to how can you look at the development cycles as more, a whole journey from, what you prioritize, how you test it, how you put it into production, and then how you measure it, and so on. But still, all of this is about, connecting different pieces of technology. And of course, it's hard. We have customers that has 32 different technologies that you need in one single value chain. And obviously, there's not just one team. It's 20 teams handling this. And you need to understand what you are affecting somewhere else, not just in production, but of course also earlier on. So I think another big thing we've seen in productivity with observability part now, which I am actually quite excited about, is a lot of the platforms have started to, I would say, not just focus on the bits and bytes and the lines of code and then the technologies that you are, and the APIs you provide and so on. But now more and more you can actually start to put on, I would say, you can put on logical containers on top, which actually turns out to be the actual business processes. And we start communicate the business on the business process level what you're actually doing. So if you do a deploy somehow somewhere, and you affect not just this technical system or this technical value chain, no, it's actually these 20 business processes, which is exactly the same business processes that you have, which is not on the technology side. I think this is a big productivity changer, because you also start to talk about practical things like funding, like investments, like a different sort of productivity. So I think yeah, that's a big one. Maybe you have some other things there, Kent.
I just want to pitch in something, because I think many companies are seeing they're not seeing an increased productivity when they implemented observability. Do you have any comments on that, Kent, maybe?
Yeah, that's and that's not just observability, right? I think that's sometimes in the IT industry, right, we get really caught up on having to acquire the latest and greatest, and everyone has to have what everyone has. We get on this shopping spree, and fear of missing out, and we need to have the new hype tool, etc. But I think for many, many are probably a little bit install and forget, right? And if we only install and forget, we might not get the promises that we were sort of delivered when someone pitched the products to us in the first place. So things like proper training, right? When we actually acquire something, we purchase something, do we actually take care of training? Do we train our employees? Do we actually procure something that we're knowledgeable about? Do we have a plan? Do we have a strategy for implementing? What are we going to implement where and how? And of course, having what we're doing actually anchored a little bit further up than just the team lead for applications or team lead for networking, that we have an actual top-down approach. Because when we in Conscia a few years ago onboarded our first observability tool, that was Thousand, right? We used to come from everything was networking. When we did something, it was like switch, it was spanning tree, it was routing. How can we do having the routing changes? That's what we cared about. And then when we started working with Thousand, they were like, but what end user services is it that you care about? And we were like totally blank, right? Because that was a top-down approach, and we were used to going bottom up. So I think that's maybe one of the key things. When you try to do observability, can you try to do it top down? What are my users actually worried about? And then implement downwards all the way to the router and the spanning tree, right? Because an end user doesn't care about Wi-Fi signals. He cares about if the application he's trying to reach works or not, right? So I think that's, if you have that mentality, trying to build value chains and stuff to monitor instead of just monitoring IT infrastructure, I think that's a better way to success, basically.
Right, thank you. So we're getting to the last topic. Time is running away. We have about 5-7 minutes left. I don't see, there's a few questions. I will take them at the end. So I think all of this sounds a bit comprehensive. So what is a good strategy then for securing that observability actually brings the wanted returns? Michael, maybe you have some thoughts on that.
We can do it very quickly. And then, as I said, this is not rocket science. This is about just handling this area like any other area that you need to have a structured approach to. So we typically follow now more and more that, of course, well, I won't take the whole recipe, but what it's all about is, knowing where you are, where you want to go, and how to get there, and what you prioritize getting there. That's basically what it's about. And for that, you need a framework. Well, we spent a fair amount of time trying to build that. I would say, of course, this isn't magic. You need to have a certain strategy, regardless of how good the technology is, to actually have, what are you going to do? And then how do you measure that you actually get there? So I think, we could go deeper, but in interest of time, I see it, which is running away. I think that is sufficient.
Awesome. Right. Are there any challenges you can think of, Kent?
I think the primary challenge, I'm just going to have to repeat myself in terms of that having a plan, do not install and forget, actually look at what problems are you actually trying to solve, and look a little bit broader than just your own domain, right? So that's yeah, in my own domain. Yeah, and of course things like massive amounts of data, where am I going to look, right? Some people are maybe not that interested in these tools you're bringing. They might be resistant to change. Certain areas of the organization might be resistant to change. And I think observability is going to be, or is one of the things that we're trying to implement that is going to be really reliant on leadership and IT leadership. So, and yeah, that's probably a challenge we have to take seriously.
Right. Thank you. So we're moving over to the Q&A. We only have one question so far. I'll at the recap at the end of the session, you will get a contact email to me. So if you have anything, you can reach out. But so there's a question coming from one of the people in the chat here. It says, any best practices when it comes to cost efficiency? So egress, ingress from a data perspective. So when you run observability in a hybrid setup with telemetry data from on-prem and multi-cloud, like Google Cloud, AWS, Azure. And I think the reason is they want to visualize on a single pane of glass. Do you have any comments on that? So any best practices when it comes to cost efficiency?
I see it says only, so I'm presuming he refers to Splunk Observability Cloud. So my gut feeling here is that I would forward this question to my colleague Roman, because he would probably be able to answer in a nanosecond. So that's what I'm gonna do after this anyway. But I can just do a quick summary of what we used to do back in the day, and that we don't have to do anymore with cost efficiency, right? So what we used to do back in the day, and I'm assuming this question is about, I have too much data, I need to remove some of the data because it costs me too much to be able to index all this data. And we used to spend massive amounts of time like reducing and filtering and regexing data back in the days, because licensing was so cost heavy. And we still do. So that type of task we still have to do. It's a planning task. And as we discussed about 3-4 minutes ago, if you do not have a good plan, you will fail. And if you don't have a plan on what type of data and the actual outcome you want, you won't know what kind of data to filter and remove and optimize for. So more from an overview, plan, know what you're doing. And for the technical side, I will forward a question to Roman, and you'll get a
I can follow up on that question, because there's another one coming in here as well.
But just very quickly on that, because I think this is also where we mentioned observability, the Splunk Observability Cloud, but this is the same for all type of platforms where consumption and ingestion and extraction of data starts to cost money. And then, of course, you want everything in at one place, and you want to bring the costs down, basically, because you don't want to bring everything up. This is also where when we mentioned open telemetry, and of course, that's a big advantage in that platform, because it makes it so much easier to do your filtering. And as that's going to evolve, this is just going to become easier. But is there a best practice for this? Yes, there is. So I would suggest that we do make contact, because there are actually quite a few things that you can already now do to control them, that cost when it comes to ingestion. So I would just one more on you, Kent, that we can forward this to the actual specialist on the specific platform.
Yeah, I see here now that he said it wasn't about Splunk only, but the observability in general. So one tip I would give there is make sure you're able to ingest and filter as close to the source as possible, so that when you ingest an index into an actual tool, you've already gotten rid of the data that you don't want, right? Because that gives you a better data set for machine learning, for machine reasoning, and making decisions on it, right? So if you're able to do gathering as close to the source as possible and do some generic filtering, there are great tools for that as well, both in Splunk, Dynatrace, AppDynamics, etc. Just do your filtering and your ingesting as close to the source as possible. That's going to help a lot, both in terms of storage space and compute power and etc. on the tool.
Okay, so there's two more questions. I can follow up on that one. There was a question about, you would like to hear more about our view on silos. And it says silos can be problematic when having many technical platforms and often various types of supports. If I would say anything about silos, I'd say observability is about maybe 10% technology, 20% process, and 70% people. Silos are usually created by people. That's my view on it. But feel free, guys, to give your comments.
Yeah, I'll repeat what I said about leadership, right? Because people will naturally gather around people that are similar to themselves. And when we're at work, we're similar in our experience and our competencies, right? We're organized that way on the hierarchical organizational chart, right? That's just the way it is. And if we don't have transparent leadership that are connecting us and creates an environment for us to collaborate across these silos, like Michael says, we're connecting the silos. If we're just hoarding inside of our own silos, it's not going to work out very great for us, right? We need to be able to foster a community and an environment for collaboration across the silos. And observability naturally provides us with the potential of doing so. But at the end of the day, it's me, you, everyone else has to sort of align with this way of working. And yeah,
I think a practical metaphor I think is useful is, okay, you have silos, you will always have them. As I said, there's competences, and the example I mentioned with these 32 layers is a financial company that has that. And in the all the out there, it's Lambda based, serverless functions that are served, very modern architecture, but it actually ends somewhere in a mainframe somewhere where there's good old COBOL and KICS and IMS and DB2 and so on. These two silos speak very different languages. The way a lot of what we're trying to achieve, and when we say linking silos, is actually to speak the same language. And although that technical lingo is very different, what is the same is, for instance, simple things like how long does a certain task, whatever, login or pay a bill or whatever. That's how long does it take? How often does it succeed? Where, those things are universal across the different, all the different silos. And the more of those and the more standardized you can get those sort of measurements that goes past, across the silos, the easier it is to talk about that, which is then not alien to any of the silos. So creating a common language, that's one of those main things that you do when you're linking the silos.
Awesome, thank you. Last question, then we have to summarize this. There was a question about Canari's managed service with regards to observability. If you could explain a little bit why.
Yeah, I'll try to do that quickly then. So managed service observability is something we started doing back in, it's 10 years ago since we started focusing on it. And it was simple in the beginning. It was, it's hard to get competence and train people up to actually knowing enough and focus enough around these different tools. It has evolved now from the most simple managed service, which is taking care of the platform, making sure the data can be trusted, all of those things, keeping not just keeping the lights on, but keeping the data up to date and trustworthy. That's sort of the basic part of it. And we do that anything from lightweight, where we just do small services, or we do full with licenses and everything, and you basically just buy capacity. And then the evolvement of that happened a couple of years later, and still do, and that is different sort of modules that you can add on top. That has to do with anything from ad hoc access to analysts that can help you on the fly. It's proactive analysis. It's different sort of reporting. It's work towards the automation part, in cooperation with the internal resources, but also then with third parties typically, which is also a situation we see often. So it's trying to simplify the way you can get observability by then providing it as a capacity service, rather as something you just resell a license and then you buy some professional services. So I think that's an attempt of explaining it quickly.
And I think we can spend a little bit more time. So, well, we are out of time. I will just share the last slide. Thank you both for attending and spending your time with us and your knowledge. So, a bit practical. Thank you everyone for attending. It was recorded. We will send out both recording and the presentation. It will be a post-webinar survey sent out. And if you have any questions, you have my email here. Or you can reach out to your local Conscia office or account manager, book a meeting, and we will gladly come out and talk a bit about observability and why it actually matters and what strategies to use. So thank you everyone for joining. And thank you both for attending and talking with us.